Hey guys, Chris Forsberg here, and welcome to this week's drift response video. Let's get to those questions.
Alright, first question is from Flutter. Ryan, what kind of coilovers do you run in the Pro car, and do you recommend the WiseFab kit for someone that is learning how to drift? I run the BC Racing ZR series, the 3-way triple adjustable shocks in the Pro car. And then I run BC Racing BRs in the Missile car, the 1JZ car, and I would definitely recommend the WiseFab kit for someone that's learning how to drift. It is a super good kit. It's really easy to use. It has good feedback. It has good feel, and it feels awesome, and you can drive in some mega angle.
First up, we got Alberto Requero. I see that you still keep the oil-water heat converter. Why? And will you connect the throttle body water lines? Now actually, on most of our builds, and even this one, we remove all the factory water oil cooling systems because putting on an aftermarket setup like a Mishimoto oil cooler is always going to be better in the long run. Might be a little more complex and might not be within your budget, but whenever we're doing a build, we want to make sure the car is as efficient as possible, and it's also a very nice safeguard to keep those oil temps down so you don't run into any issues. And as far as connecting the water lines to the throttle body, depending on the build, sometimes we'll leave them on there, but I typically remove them, especially since it is just prone to be another spot where you can get a water leak. It's actually been an issue on my KA car in the past. I sprung a leak at the track and it was the throttle body water lines, so deleted those. And for the most part, you don't need them. It is done from the factory for cars that live in all different kinds of climates, but especially if it's a track-only car, I would suggest getting rid of them.
Eugene Shestopal asked, Chris, Ryan, would you recommend to run an inline hydro e-brake setup or a dual caliper setup? Benefits, drawbacks? I would say you definitely want to run a separate set of calipers. The inline, you always are going to have some pedal feedback. So when you're grabbing a handbrake, you're always going to have some feedback in the foot pedal, and it's not really ideal. So what you want is a totally separate system with some separate calipers for sure, where you'll never get that extra pedal feel in the foot pedal.
Next up, we got Nick Mavity, who says, I know a lot of people are doing it, but why switch to an electric fan over the clutch fan? It pulls more drag on the alternator and engine. Well, yes, it does pull more from the alternator, which then pulls more from the engine to power electric fans like that. However, it does not pull nearly as much as a clutch fan. That's going to be a lot bigger of a drain on the engine, slowing the revs down and everything else. I know it does have that clutch effect on there, but still does pull some decent power out of the engine. Another reason is you get a little more working space in the engine bay, and so you can actually get in there and have a little more space to work on the front of the engine, get to your belts, anything like that, without that big fan shroud in your way. And also, the other nice thing about it, which is one of the reasons why we put this on, was the Mishimoto thermostat that hooks up to the electronic fans, so you can actually set the temperature that you want those fans to kick on and kick off. So you can keep your water temperature much more stable than if you were just running a mechanical clutch type fan.
Preston Sattersfield asked, how easy is it to put a 2JZ VVTi in an S15? I'd say it's not any harder than any other S chassis or any other car in general that you're kind of swapping that motor into that's not from its original chassis. You're just going to have to, I'm pretty sure they make mounts for it. So that's pretty easy to swap in, and then the biggest thing is really just doing wiring and finding somebody reputable and easy to do that. And even then, I'm sure there's plenty of wiring companies that make wiring kits and harnesses for that car.
Alright, next up we got 05 Coda, who says, hey guys, looking at purchasing a BMW 135i. Do you guys think it's a bad idea to purchase a daily that I can drift on the weekends here and there? I don't have space for a second car as of now. Well, of course I don't think it's a bad idea, because that's kind of how all of us started. You have your one car, it's your street car, it's also your drift car, and it's not always easy to have a second car, especially that's track only. So when you have a daily driver that you're taking to the track, the biggest thing is you want to make sure you have certain things in place so that you don't get left stranded if you have a mechanical failure. Bring extra tie rods, maybe bring some spare axles, because you need to be able to drive that thing home if you go off track and damage something. So it is the one thing to make sure that you have in place, because as I said, the last thing you want to do is go out and try and have a good time and break something that's really small and get stuck. So but good luck with that.
Dylan Ridgway, he asked, when you guys cut the welds out to allow more angle, does that take away from the structural integrity of the strut tower? I'd say it might take a little bit away from the strut tower integrity. Not much. That stuff is just sheet metal in a lot of newer cars. That's kind of filled in with plastic nowadays anyways. So on newer cars, it's not that big of a deal. I'd say on the older chassis, like older S13s and 14s and Corollas and stuff like that, maybe it'll take a little bit more integrity out, where you maybe want to just put a little bit, a brace on there or something if it's needed. You'll definitely get the strut towers do flex a lot more than you think they do. So, tightening that area up wouldn't be a bad idea in general.
Alright, next up we got DJ DS3, who asks, what car do you think will be the next 240 now that 240s are getting more expensive? Well, see, it started with the Corollas. They started to get rare and expensive, and then everyone started to move away from them. Now it's the 240s. They're getting rare and expensive. So, yeah, the next car, I would say, would be a Nissan 350Z. It sounds like it would be expensive, but they are about 15 years old now, and so you can get your hands on one for relatively cheap, and they have great drivetrains, great engines, so they make enough power so you don't have to do an engine swap as soon as you buy the car like you do with a 240. And with that, like I said, you have a nice strong drivetrain, so the transmission's good, diff, axles, you're pretty much ready to hit the track. The other car, if you didn't want to get a 350, I would say is a BMW 3 Series. Same thing, nice 6-cylinder engine, strong drivetrain, ready for the track, and also both of them have a strong enough motor where if you do want to add some power, you can slap a turbo right on that thing.
Alex Martinez asked, when removing wires from wire harness, where should you start? Do I trace wire back to the ECU? I am the first to tell you I am not a wiring guy. I am not that good at it. But from my knowledge, I would definitely say trace it back to the ECU and pull it from the actual pinout. That way you won't have that wire in the harness at all. And as long as you don't need it for anything, then it's perfectly fine. It should be a lot cleaner in the engine bay as well.
Next up, we got Franklin Chu, who asks, brake upgrades. What are the key things to avoid brake vibration? Should we always measure the brake surface of the rotor every time before we install? How do you place brake bias of a street/track car? Well, yeah, you should always check your brakes anytime you're doing regular maintenance. Measure the thickness of the rotor, make sure there's still the optimal amount left. Always check your pads, that you're not down to the wear. Getting the metal to metal contact is never a good thing. And as far as brake bias, you always want to start off a little front heavy. It is a preference. Some people go rear heavy, but with that, you get a brake proportioning valve, and you can always dial it in at the track and see what suits you best. It is a driver preference, so always play around with that and see what you like best.
Last question from Jan Frederick Svensson. Sorry, butchered that a little bit. Ryan, if you were going to build a sleeper, what car would you choose? Oh man, that is always a really tough question for me. I like so many different cars, and so many different cars would be sleepers. I think a big body, 4-door would be pretty sick. Like a big 7 Series or the Lexus, the 460 or the new 500. All those big body cars would be super cool with like a super high performance motor in there, making a ton of power and ready to shred on the street. It would be pretty badass.
Alright, next up we got Nick Bruce, who asks, what's giving that SR20 its extra horsepower? I have a stroker kit on mine and want more power and don't know where to start. Well, a stroker kit, it doesn't exactly give you more power. It does give you more torque. You're getting more displacement with that, so it's a good place to start, but it's not a real big power adder. Where we're getting all the power on this SR20 is the aftermarket turbo. So we put a Garrett GTX turbo on there and we turn the boost up, and we're basically running as much as that fuel system will allow us, which is putting us over 300 wheel horsepower with the Deechworks injectors and fuel pump. And if we wanted to go more than that, we would want to start getting into a built bottom end anyway, so it's a nice little safeguard so you don't keep pushing that boost trying to make 400, 500 wheel horsepower, which has been done, but it's just a ticking time bomb at that point. So a nice steady 350 wheel on a stock SR20 will last you all day.
Alright guys, that is it for this week's Drift Response. Thank you all for tuning in to the latest episode, and make sure you stay tuned to Network A and keep posted on our progress on Drift Idiots S14, and keep drifting fun. See you guys soon.